If someone tells you that was a great episode, but they don't come back, they don't buy from you, and they don't take action on what you told them to do inside that episode, was it actually a good episode? Look, I'm not knocking your content because your podcast is not just content. In fact, like it or not, your show is actually a sequence of decisions that you're either guiding or not to elicit the action that you want your listener to take. Most of us don't think about our podcast this way, but in many cases, listener inaction is a sign that your listener journey is missing a few key steps. Vance Morris is a former Disney exec who spent years behind the scenes at Disney learning how to engineer user behavior, and he is back in the studio with us to show you the role that hidden details play in training your listeners to follow through and designing moments that lead people to actually hit play, follow your show, and buy from you. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your podcast binge-worthy. Vance, welcome back.
I appreciate it, Courtney. Hopefully we'll deliver a few more golden nuggets here.
Yes. Well, if you didn't catch the episode before this one, Vance, we talked all about what Disney magic actually is. They're working so hard behind the scenes, focused on the most little minute details that maybe we would never think about, but all engineered to help drive behavior and create a guest experience that ultimately elicits the action that they want people to take. Come back to the parks, come spend more money, right? The same is true for our podcasts. So I'm excited to break down how do we actually do this. We talked a lot about how Disney obsesses over the small details. I'm curious, what would you say are the equivalent small details in a podcast setting that might increase or decrease whether someone takes the action we're actually asking them to take?
Sure. And I am not the example of this today if you're seeing this on video, but your background is important. Normally, you would see my bookcase and some Disney stuff behind me because I look at especially video as being on television, and it's not a Zoom meeting. It has to be thought about. You don't see my bedroom back there, my unmade bed and that kind of stuff. So what is the environment that you find yourself in when you're doing the podcast? Because most of them are going to be probably a Zoom or a video podcast, and you may publish the audio or the video or both. So your background is really important. What you wear, I've seen podcast hosts, they show up, in their little hoodie and we're talking, I'm on an attorney podcast and the attorney's wearing a hoodie. I'm like, this is not congruent with what we're talking about. So you also have to look at that. Congruency is, what I'm saying, how I'm saying it, the voice inflection. Is it congruent with the messaging? Is it congruent with who I am? And so, yeah, those are definitely some of the areas that you should be looking at. And then also looking at Disney as a master at extracting money from your wallet and leaving you feel happy about it and wanting to come back again and again. So we take that and we need to look at our entire customer journey and eliminate what I call either the sales or the service prevention department. We all have them. So if your call to action at the end of your podcast is to go to a particular website or to do a particular action that's not right there on the podcast site, well, that darn thing better work. So do you test out? Have you gone through your funnel as a guest or as a lead, and do all of the buttons click and go to the right place? If not, they leave. And most of the time, they're not going to say, hey, I really wanted your thing, but the link didn't work. Most of the time, they're just like, they're on to the next thing. So really making sure that you're not putting up roadblocks to a sale and really taking care of those things.
Yes. Okay. There's a lot I want to unpack here. But first, I need to shout out Jill, Philip, and Angela, who actually do email me. They listen to the show and they're like, Courtney, this link didn't work, or you mentioned this, but it's not in the show notes. And I know that's a unicorn. Like, most of us don't hear that from our podcast listeners. So thank you all for having my back, because it does happen. We're human, right? But at the same time, Vance, to your point, these are the details we need to be paying attention to. And I also feel that for a lot of hosts, we're relying a lot on AI to help us save time, which, again, not a bad thing inherently in and of itself, but sometimes things can get missed, when we're relying on a tool to do the work for us. And this is a big fear a lot of hosts have about outsourcing certain elements of their podcast too, because they want to make sure that those details are there. Those details do matter. And at the same time, we're human and there's a tendency to overlook them. And so I think, there's two sides to a coin here, where there's the details that maybe we are aware of that we do make an effort to get right. But then there's the details that maybe we're not aware of that should be there, that without them being there are maybe detracting from the listener experience. So if we were to look at a podcast, kind of like Disney looks at a park, how would you map that listener journey from the first time they encounter your podcast all the way up to that call to action, whatever that is that we want them to take?
Right. Well, one, you have to map it out. And what is that first point? Did they see an ad on Facebook? Did they see, did they just search for podcasts and yours came up? So what does that screen look like? What does the about page look like? What does it say? And are there things to do? So I'm, firm believer in interactivity. How can you interact with what's going on? Because once you engage them, you have them, really. I mean, that's how Disney sells stuff. I took my kids once and, we had one of those kiosks where they sell the big goofy balls, and, guy bounces the ball to one of my kid bounces it back to the guy bounces it to my other kid, bounces it back, then bounces it to me, and somehow my credit card's whacked $97 and it's in my backpack. They engage us in play in order to make the sale. So looking at that, okay, where in the journey can you engage them? What can you do? Do you have, is there a survey they can take? Is there some kind of quiz or other engagement that they can go and, because we need to train them to click on things. And that's really important. Disney gets you to do things because they tell you to do them. Like, go stand here and then you walk here. And then now it's done more eloquently than that, but they guide you completely. There's signs that say, go this way. There are cast members or employees standing there telling you to, go that way. So we have to give direction as well in the initial viewing of whatever it is they're looking at for us. Most of it will probably be that home page of your podcast. So what's there? What entertainment elements are there? What's clickable? Again, we want to get them clicking, because if they're used to clicking, then when you tell them in a podcast to go click something, they're like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to click because the guy told me to. So yeah, definitely things like that.
Put yourself in your listener's shoes. And this is sometimes something we don't take the time to do. Maybe we did it when we started our podcast, but we don't continually do it as we continue to produce content for that podcast. And I always like to just kind of gut check myself every once in a while and say, okay, what is my listener encountering right now when they see my cover art, when they read my description, when they read our show notes or the episode title, and so forth. And then there's the things inside the episode. We hear a lot about gamification, and this is what you're describing, that interactivity and even Easter eggs. I think about like the hidden Mickeys as you're going through It's a Small World, and how many of those can you find and count? And, it keeps you engaged. So if we were to look at a podcast episode that same way, let's look at the episode as this is a ride at Disney. We're taking our listeners on this ride. What has to happen for them to start the ride, like to get in line for that ride, AKA click the play button, and then to stay engaged on the ride? And that is, listening through till the end of your episode, and hopefully at that point taking action and or coming back to listen again. Are there little things we can do within an episode, Easter eggs that we can maybe plant, or some ideas for gamification within the episode itself and the content that we're creating? So that next time we go to create an episode, we can say, okay, I'm not just going to put the content out. I'm actually going to think about this a little bit differently so that I can engineer that engagement.
Well, certainly gamification is huge in that it works. I mean, you go back to the days of, Avon, or you go to a Mary Kay convention and these ladies look like third world generals because they got all the buttons on their sash. Well, they give those buttons out just for activity, not even for accomplishment, but activity. Oh, you joined Mary Kay. Great. Here's a button. Oh, you made it to your first meeting. Great. Here's a button. You made your first sale, even though it was to yourself. Here's another button. And by the time you get to your first meeting, you got half a dozen of these things, on your sash. So people are motivated by those. I want the next thing. How do I attain the next thing? So, is there a portal where they can see, oh, I've listened to 7 episodes and I got this reward. I want to get to 10 episodes because I know I'm going to get that reward. So yeah, 100% gamifying it can be fun too. Well, certainly having a contest as part of the episode. Hey, I'm going to say something at some point in the next 12 minutes. When I say that, you should, or ask that question, here's what I want you to do, and you're going to get X prize. And so again, and I don't do it on every episode, but I'll do quite a few of those. And one, if you tell them that something is coming, well, now they're going to wait. So they will listen to as much of the thing as you want them to. Now, if your podcast 45 minutes, I don't know, but if it's manageable, it's as long as there's somebody's commute or 30 minutes on the treadmill, you got to remember where they're listening. And that also brings it back to being interesting. Think about where your podcast listeners are listening to the podcast. They're in their car and they're working out or whatever, mowing the yard. Have you said something interesting in order for them to remember long enough to go and either go to the show notes or to at least Google you or Google whatever it was that you talked about? And you should scatter those triggers throughout the podcast so it gets people to say, oh yeah, I got to do that.
Yes, I'm thinking about just in recent, like within the last week, noticing the interactions that my family has had with media. My husband was cutting the grass the other day and he comes in and he's like, oh, I listened to this podcast about Airbnbs. We just recently launched an Airbnb, and he's like, and this thing and that thing and this thing. And so I think that, sometimes as hosts, and I am guilty of this, Vance, we rely a lot on thinking our listeners going to be interested enough in what we have to say that they're just going to stay engaged. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that can be the case. My husband really wanted to learn about whatever this Airbnb thing was he was listening to. Yep. So he listened to the episode and he kind of got the value out of it that he was looking for. But other times we're going to need to help them stay engaged a little bit. And now I'm thinking about my son watching this dragon video where, every so often the video would be like, and what dragon would you be? Or do you think you could tame this dragon? Well, if you do, you might want to stick around because the next dragon is going to be even more of a challenge, right? And just kind of like, from an 8-year-old's perspective, engaging them in that way to say like, here's something that you need to pay attention to next. And opening those loops can be a really effective way to keep people listening. How can we turn this episode into a game? How can we plant a little Easter egg or a code word or something where if they hear that code word, then they can email it in and, get this thing.
One of the companies that does this really well in TV world, it was called the cliffhanger. Like, before they break to commercial, something happens in the episode, they're dangling from somewhere or, somebody's coming at them. And then it goes to commercial and you're like, well, I got to figure out what the hell happened. So I'm going to wait through the commercials and come back to the episode. We can do that too. If you listen to Sirius XM, the DJs are great. They'll talk up this song and they'll talk up the artist and they'll say, yep, and that'll come right after this song. Oh, for God's sake. So you mean I got to listen to Proud Mary before I get to listen to AC/DC? Come on. But they're great at it. They build it up. Then they say, okay, we're going to cover that in, 3 minutes after this song is over. So you can build that into your podcast.
Vance, while we have you, I want to pivot a little bit because this is something else that comes up a lot for our hosts. And it's this thought of giving the call to action. Right? We're engineering all this stuff because we want someone to take an action, whether that's leave a review, join the email list, buy the thing. And then when it actually comes time to give that call to action, I hear from hosts all the time, well, it feels a little awkward, or I start to feel salesy, or I'm really not sure where to put this call to action. Where should I put it? Courtney, is there a place, should it be pre-roll? Should it be mid-roll? Should I save it till the end? And the reason that they are asking this question is because it feels unnatural, when really giving a call to action should feel like the most natural thing in the world because you've inevitably led someone to that point. So once you've mapped the listener journey and you're thinking about, okay, how can I gamify this to keep people engaged? Now it's time to give the call to action and what needs to happen leading up to that so that it feels like it's a natural next step for the listener without it feeling forced or transactional.
Right. Well, first and foremost, I don't know how many of your listeners actually script their show or just kind of wing it. You should at least have an outline, especially if you're by yourself and you're not interviewing somebody. And then you can naturally put your call to action in. I would put it in multiple places because you don't know how long the listener is going to stay. Yes, we would love them to stay till the end, but if the only place you put the call to action is at the end, they're never going to hear it. And it needs to be a low barrier call to action, something that is easy for them to do and something that they would be willing to do, where you're going to give them something of value in exchange for their information. So, if the call to action is to get on my email list, okay, great. We want you to get on the email list, but I'm going to give you a private podcast. Here's a 3-episode private podcast just for you by signing up for newsletter list or what have you. So definitely you want to put it in multiple places. The other reason you want to script it is that you can then engineer transitions. I call them bridges. How do you bridge from what you're talking about to what you want them to do, to the call to action? And, one I use a lot, especially in my writing, is, hey, what does this have to do with your business? It's a very easy bridge. And then I'll go in and I'll tell them, okay, this applies to your business like this. And if you think this is interesting, I've got an additional resource and you can find it at blah, blah, blah. And don't change your tone of voice. You got to practice this. I'm amazed at the number of people that don't rehearse. I speak a lot on a lot of stages, and I rehearse up until the minute I go on. Yeah, I know my stuff cold, but at the same time, I don't want to be, just winging it. So you got to rehearse, especially if there's a big payday in it. I've had some $100,000 speeches, and if I had flubbed my call to action, well, it certainly wouldn't have been $100,000. I can tell you that.
Yeah. And, we don't think about the rehearsing piece of it, because I know for some, rehearsing kind of gets you in your head about it. Then it's like, well, now I feel like I'm, I don't know, more stiff and scripted than if I hadn't rehearsed it. So I'm just going to wing it, But at the same time, when you just show up and just wing it, well, it may not land in the way that we ultimately need it to, and in the most natural way that we need it to, for a listener to connect with it and actually take the action. This goes back to the emotional piece that we want to evoke that we talked about in the previous episode. I'm curious too, what would prevent someone from taking action, even if they're interested? Are there any common forms of invisible friction that might make someone hesitate, or that would stop them from doing the thing you're asking them to do, even when they're like, yeah, I do like this podcast, I do like you, the host, and I would leave a review, but I'm not going to do that right now?
Whatever you're asking them, again, it's got to be easy. Again, eliminating that sales prevention department. And did you say something after the call to action that kind of irked them? Did you end with the call to action and they say goodbye to everybody? Or did you continue on and you actually worked against yourself by saying something that maybe you gave away the secret, the whole thing you wanted them to go learn. And now they're like, I don't need to go because you already told me.
Yeah, I think that's an important one too. And or apologizing for it through our voice vocally, apologizing for even asking. If you're not too busy, go download this thing.
The other thing too is give it urgency. You put a date on it. Say, look, if you want this by March 15th, otherwise this offer's gone. So you always have to have a deadline on your offers.
Yeah, creating that urgency. And then I think also too, and you alluded to this, is what problem does it solve for them?
Yeah.
And what outcome is it going to help them achieve that they haven't been able to achieve on their own? And showing them, much to the bridge to the call to action, showing them how this thing that you're telling them to go do actually bridges them to get them to the result that they're looking for.
You have to future pace them.
Okay, now that's a technical term right there. Tell us what pacing is.
Future is showing them the future. If you do this call to action, here's what your life could look like. So if you buy one of my products, let's say it was on customer retention, here's what you can expect. You can expect, your customers sticking around 17% longer, or you're going to have, you're not going to have to work as hard to get new customers because you're going to be keeping the old ones. And you show them what the future is going to look like by doing whatever it is you just asked them to do. Future pacing is showing them, in 30 days, this is what your life is going to look like if you do this diet or if you do this exercise. And all of those diet people, and they use future pacing. If you do these exercises, you will be pain-free. So yeah, you want to lead them there. And then when you're done leading them and then you do the call to action, it just makes sense. So if you want to learn how to do these 6 exercises, click here and get the exercises.
So, all right, if someone's listening to this and they want to improve their experience for their listener, maybe they're a little unclear as to where to start. I would say step 1, go back to the previous episode, lay the groundwork. We talked all about that and kind of what you need to have as the foundation to then start crafting a listener experience, just like Disney does, to ultimately drive the outcome that they want. But if you were taking a look at someone's show, walking away from this episode, what is something that you would have them change and assess first and foremost?
I think certainly, what is it that they're truly selling? You've got to nail that down. The other thing, though, and this is a broader thing, is, we've dropped quite a few ideas here. Implement something. Pick one thing that you heard today, whether it's on this podcast or something you read, or go implement something, because that's the only way you're going to move the needle. You're not going to get to where you're going unless you actually do something. So if you want to profit, you got to implement.
Very helpful reminder there. Vance, thank you for being here today. I really appreciate you and for all the wisdom that you shared.
Well, Courtney, I appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much.
So let's say that you go out and you apply these principles to Disneyfy your show. How are you going to know that they're actually working? That is the question that we are going to answer and close the loop on in the next episode, where I show you how to make sense of your podcast analytics. Because podcast analytics are the things that most people don't want to look at. They look at their downloads. The downloads aren't growing. They decide the podcast isn't growing. And that's not actually true. In fact, your podcast is probably healthier than you think it is. And I'm going to make it way easier than it is right now for you to tell if the efforts that you're making on the front end of your podcast with content creation and marketing are actually making a difference on the back end with the bottom line results that you want to see, i.e. listener growth and conversions. It's going to be an episode that's going to leave you feeling so excited about your show because you're finally going to understand how to interpret all the confusing metrics, which ones actually matter, and what they're telling you about your podcast so you know exactly where to focus your efforts next. All that's coming up next to help you make your podcast binge-worthy.